Siddhant, rate yourself on empathy, honestly.
Out of 10, I'd say maybe a 6 to a 7. I try to listen and be there for my friends. Why do you ask?
Because this next session is exactly about that. The noise inside boys. About how boys can learn to see empathy, not as a weakness, but as a strength.
Ah, I see where you're going. It's about how stories can help us look beyond stereotypes, showing boys not just as tough, but as thoughtful, emotional, and kind.
Exactly. And that's why this session is so important. Good afternoon, everyone. We hope you're enjoying the energy of the Neve Literature Festival 2025 as much as we are. Our next session promises to spark an important conversation, one that asks how stories can shape boys into not just heroes on the page, but also empathetic human beings in real life.
That's right, Navya. This session is titled The Noise Inside Boys. It explores how writers create work that resonates with young male readers, offering them new ways to see themselves beyond these narrow ideas of toughness or the traditional stereotypes of masculinity.
And it goes even further, asking how the books boys read today can shape the kind of friends, partners, and caregivers they will grow up to be. Because literature isn't just about entertainment, it's about opening doors to identity, compassion, and possibility.
To lead this conversation, we have two extraordinary voices with us. Our first speaker is Anthony McGowan, a multi-award winning author of more than 50 books spanning adults, teenagers, and children. Born in Manchester and raised in Yorkshire, Mr. McGowan's work has been celebrated for its sharp insight and emotional honesty.
His novella Lark won the prestigious Carnegie Medal in 2020, and in 2025, he's bringing us not just one, but two exciting new books, The Beck and Three Birds. Alongside his writing, he's also shaping future storytellers as a senior lecturer in creative writing at St. Mary's University in London.
Joining him is Mr. Pablo Cartaya, a New York Times best-selling author, screenwriter, actor, and speaker, whose work bridges cultures and mediums. His novels and plays have been published by some of the biggest names: Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, McGraw-Hill, and Disney Publishing worldwide.
Mr. Cartaya's storytelling has reached audiences far beyond the page. He's collaborated with Disney, Apple TV Plus, and even Sesame Street, adapting stories for both television and film. His novels include The Epic Fall of Arturo Zamora, Marcus Vega Doesn't Speak Spanish, Each Tiny Spark, The Last Beekeeper, and his recent graphic novel, Curveball.
What ties both Mr. McGowan and Mr. Cartaya's work together is their commitment to portraying boys not just as cliches, but as complex, thoughtful characters who can laugh, cry, care, and grow. Their stories give young readers a space to see themselves differently, and perhaps to imagine the adults they might become.
The session will run for 50 minutes, with a 35-minute conversation followed by a 15-minute Q&A, so be ready with your questions. This is a rare opportunity to hear two leading authors reflect on how literature can redefine masculinity for a new generation.
So without further delay, let's welcome Mr. Anthony McGowan and Mr. Pablo Cartaya to the stage for The Noise Inside Boys.
Thank you, that was amazing, by the way. Brilliant introduction.
I have to apologize ahead of time. I thought the session was this noise inside boy bands, so I dressed accordingly, but I see it's, okay, never mind. I want to use these two young people as my hype people for the rest of any intro. Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful.
They should be here instead of us, shouldn't they, doing the conversation?
I know. I got so pumped. I'm ready.
Okay, first of all, hello everyone. Great to be here. I just thought I'd slightly kick off before we get onto the main core of the discussion with asking Pablo a question. A few years ago, I was at a similar event with a writer called Meg Rosoff, who some of you may have come across, and she asked me out of the blue if there was a turning point in my life, and she had this theory which I kind of picked up on, which is that for a writer, maybe particularly a writer for young people, is often a turning point, something key that happened to you in your younger life. and that's the wellspring of your creativity and your books. Some point that is like a nexus of energy that you circle back to again and again in your writing. And I thought about it, and I realised that there was absolutely that turning point for me, and that's partly why I focus on teenagers above all else. So I wondered, Pablo, if there was a similar turning point or crucial key event in your early life that formed that wellspring for you.
Well, it was when my dad cut me off. No. So I'll begin by saying I always talk about especially when I speak to young people that are endeavoring to pursue a career in the arts, right? Whether it be writing or acting or anything, right? I always say you have to burn the boats, right? You have to burn the boats. And what do I mean by that is that you have to kind of go into this space that you're endeavoring to try, right? Be it an art, whatever art form it is. And once you step on that island, you have to turn around and set the boat that you arrived in ablaze, right? And so when I told my father that, he was like, well, best of luck. and so to get to where the turning point is, I began my career as an actor. And I've done, I was in a show called Will and Grace for a little while. I was in some telenovelas.
You got fans already
I
in the
was
audience.
almost in a boy band. And I just found that every audition that I would go to, I was typecast as one thing or another. It was either the sexy Latino or the criminal Latino. It was one of those two things. Like that was the extent of my...
And I still see both things in you, Pablo.
You know, and what I decided at that point was I didn't want to be put into one box, right? As an artist, I knew I wanted to be an artist, but what does that mean exactly? I didn't, it could cover a lot of things, and the turning point for me that made me want to come and become a writer, where I could control the worlds that I was building, was a moment when I was at an audition. And I came in and I did this audition. I thought I did a pretty good job. And the casting director, it was in LA, and I'll never forget his face, because after I finished the audition, he said, can I just ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, why are you calling yourself Pablo? And I was like, well, that's my name. And he says, well, you don't look like a Mexican. And I said, well, sir, I'm not Mexican, I'm Cuban American. I'm Cuban. My parents are Cuban. And he says, well, you're not dark enough to be a Cuban. This is a white man telling me, I know Cubans, and you don't look like one. And then I start reflecting on the fact that, like, how many times have people mispronounced my name? How many times have people asked me, where am I from? How do I speak English? How do all of these things? Does anybody here, if you go outside of India or you go outside of your own communities, has anybody here ever had trouble someone pronouncing your name? Raise your hands, right? And it just becomes infuriating, it's frustrating. And so how do you take control of that, right? Well, you know what? I'm going to control my own narrative. I'm going to write my own stories. I'm going to become the hero of my own stories. And so that was the initial turning point to claim my name back.
Amazing. But is that also, returning to our theme, was that also the source of your empathy, that understanding for others, because you've been the victim of prejudice in that way?
Maybe in a way, yeah. It's I think since we are talking about boys specifically, I think that allowing a boy to be a boy, right, in whatever that context, whatever that may mean, right, and to be able to access the points of their vulnerability, I think is a very important thing. I come from, like a typical, my dad was very stoic, didn't really ever, talk about emotions and stuff like that. But he never discouraged crying.
Oh, okay, good.
You know, I've never seen my father cry himself, but he was like, you can cry if you want to. Like, he was,
Okay.
you know, okay,
Maybe your
yeah.
challenge should be to make your father cry.
I've tried. My dad doesn't even tell me that, you know, I've done a good job. He tells my mom, or he tells all his friends. And then he told, my mom's like, well, your dad's very proud of you. And I said, well, why doesn't he say something? He goes, because he's afraid your head's going to get too big. Yeah. So tell me about, so turning point for you, like what?
I'm not sure I can in the public, but I did have okay, there's no children in the audience, are there? No? Put your hand up if you're a child. Good.
Close your ears.
So mine was quite a dramatic turning point, not to do with creativity, but to do with life change. That when I was 15, I had an affair with my school teacher, and she was kind of my first girlfriend. And also, it was an incredibly intense thing to happen to a kind of someone on the edge between childhood and adulthood. It was a big formative experience. And so later on when I started to write, somehow my mind, I didn't think I would be a writer for children or teenagers. I kind of assumed I'd be an adult writer. But the stories that were in my head went back to that time. Not specifically to do with that relationship, but to do with that kind of maelstrom, which is teenage life, which I know you've written about as well. You know, that kind of moronic inferno inside the teenage boy's head, that mix of hormones and rage and love and you're changing inside, the world around you is changing. So that for me was something that pulled me back. Though I should say, again, trying to pull us back to the empathy theme or writing for boys, when I started writing, that these kind of important issues that we're talking about today, that they weren't in my head at all. That what I was trying to do was to be funny and clever and unusual and stimulating. So the first book that I wrote for young people was a book called Hellbent, which is about a teenage boy who in the first chapter, he dies and he goes to hell. And it's a kind of a retelling of Dante's Inferno for teenagers. But it kind of, what I was trying to do there was, it's described on the front cover as the most disgusting book ever published for children, and it probably is. It's full of bodily fluids and excrement and all kinds of vileness. But in that, so I was trying to be funny and strange, but also trying to be intellectually challenging. You know, it's full of philosophical issues. I was trying to sugar that pill of the serious subjects with bodily fluids, if that's the thing you can sugar anything with. So my first few books were a bit like this, that they were meant to be demanding, funny, mad, surreal books, where I wasn't trying to be empathetic. Although I suppose that, in a way, all novels involve that empathy engine, that you're always inside somebody else's head. But I wasn't consciously thinking about that. But then about halfway through my career, I realized that in these early books, what I was doing was not always the best thing for a writer or a human being to do. Yeah. I was showing off. I was trying to prove to my readers how many other books I'd read, how good I was at complicated metaphors and similes. And I thought that maybe there's a different way to try and tell a story, to try and in fact be true, rather than trying to be clever all the time. So I began to write a series of books about two brothers, the older one of which has got learning difficulties. So his younger brother has to be his carer. And again, was then my route into empathy, where suddenly we're in this situation where it's all about the love between the two brothers, and the younger one, who's the narrator of the stories, has to be that kind of caring, empathetic character. So that was that sort of sudden shift into those more serious, perhaps more emotionally impactful areas.
Well, we had a good chat last night, and we were kind of
no beers were taken during this.
No,
chat,
yeah,
I assure you.
It was thank God it was not recorded. But it's interesting because we were both kind of talking about how our life has kind of inspired some of the work that enters into our, some of the characters that have made their way into our books. So a lot of people ask me, well, is the epic fail of Arturo Zamora based on your life? And I always say, well, yes and no, right? It's kind of a mixed thing, right? There are pieces, and this is probably this young man, Arturo, is probably the closest, I would say, to a feeling that I didn't know how to express growing up. The story behind the real, the main part of this book is a kid trying to say goodbye to his grandmother. Okay, see, now I'm starting to get it, but oh God, you see, boys are sensitive, right? We can, every time, it does not fail. This book came out in 2017. It does not fail. The moment I speak about my grandmother, I get teary-eyed. I don't know if anybody here has lost a grandparent, and it was like a beloved grandparent, and you kind of move on with life, right? And then somehow you start thinking about it, and you start remembering the cookies that she made you, or the lessons that and you start it starts flooding you through. And I think that the act of writing this book was a way of saying goodbye to her that I wasn't able to. And so part of that is it's really literally happening in real time. The sensitivity. I mean, it's the idea that this young boy, this kid, is like desperately trying to hold on to his grandmother by protecting this restaurant that is being threatened by a greedy land developer to tear it down, right? It's her beloved restaurant, and it's like he's desperately holding on to this. And I realized that as I was writing this story, I wasn't writing it, I want to write a sensitive boy book. I was trying to write a story about how I could say goodbye to my grandmother.
Okay.
And this is what came out of it.
Yeah.
And for you, right, with the brothers, if you don't mind, can you share? We don't have to get into the full details of it.
We said what happened last night would stay last night. Well, yeah. So
Well, we don't have to go into the details, but it's
sure.
But I think it's
fine.
It lends itself to.
The emotional core of those 4 books now in the trilogy, and it's about the love between the 2 brothers, and it was partly an atonement I was writing that for. I was a really horrible big brother to my kid brother Niall. I'm basically a nice guy. I was a nice guy outside the family, but in the family, I was a monster. I used to brutalize my kid brother, both emotionally, because he wasn't exactly how I wanted to be, and physically, in a way that... anyone else here bully their younger brothers or sisters, or... Are we terrible? And I mean, since then, I've literally got down on my knees and begged his forgiveness for being such a horrible big brother. And I should have been this incredible positive force in his life, and I just wasn't. And he told me as well. I'm getting a bit emotional here. You started this, Pablo.
I started it.
That he did in fact still look up to me and admire me, and yet I kind of betrayed that. And then I thought, I wanted somehow to atone in this fictional world. I just wish I'd done it in real life.
Yeah.
But also, you talk about that your grandmother. Is your grandfather still with us?
No, they've all passed.
I think, because in my latest book, The Beck, I also write about a relationship between a child and his grandfather. And it's a really interesting relationship, because I'm kind of looking forward to being a grandparent myself, because as a parent, it's quite a pressurizing, intense thing, trying to keep your children alive But with a grandparent, it's a fun relationship. You can enjoy that and explore other areas. So so obviously it's a close relationship, but with enough distance to allow entertainment and fun to go in that space.
Yeah, and I think also what happens sometimes, especially in children's book world, is that we sort of ignore that the boys could be feeling something, right? If a boy prefers to have a ball in his hands, it's like, well, he's a footballer. He doesn't care about any of that. And it's like, it's almost like assuming that there's nothing going on beyond that. Yeah. Or, he likes to wrestle around. And he's it's a perfect example. My son is 14 years old. He's a junior Olympic swimmer. He looks like a Dorito chip. He's like this. He's like very fit.
Like his dad.
Well, I don't know. But so he's kind of, he's a cute kid and, whatever. And he's an athlete and does not speak the entire day. He wakes, I don't know if any of you have teenage boys, does not speak a word the entire day. He wakes up in the morning, his hair's like a little llama, he's making sure he makes it more like a llama. You see the boys now with their little llama hairs. And he's like this, and he puts on his cologne, he's like there, he's like quietly, eats his breakfast. I take him to school, drive him to school, doesn't say a word, doesn't say anything. I pick him up from school, how was school? Good. The whole thing. I mean, raise your hand if you have a kid that you know this kid, right? And she's like, what'd you do in school today? Nothing. How was there? It was good. Did you learn anything? Yeah. So this is the whole thing, right? And you think there's nothing going on in this child, right? So it does not fail. It does not fail. We go, my wife and I, we're kind of watching the TV. You know, we're kind of in our bed, and we're just sort of like just kind of winding down. It's about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, whatever. And in comes Leonardo, walks in, takes off his shirt, looks into our mirror, starts flexing, and starts talking about his day.
Oh, wow.
Oh, today, actually, my teacher, I wrote this thing, and my teacher really liked it, and he starts going on about, but he's like this. He goes, did you see my traps, though? Did you see my traps? He starts doing this. And my wife and I are looking like, we have our show paused, and he's going on for like 15, 20 minutes talking about his day in his way, right? And if I will, for just a second, I want to, because again, this is a kid who you look and you would not think, because he's very, what one would quote unquote say, he's very boy, he's very masculine, he's very this, or whatever that means, right? And he's an athlete, and you wouldn't think that this kid is a sensitive one. So all of a sudden in his class, he writes something in class for an assignment, and he doesn't tell me, but I know his teacher, and his teacher knows that I'm a writer, and she texts me. It looks like there's another writer in the family. Leo has not told me that he has written this. She sends me this. The ocean's voice. The ocean breathes in slow, salt-slicked sighs, spilling secrets into the wind's hands as foam curls around my toes, a rush of singing against the shore. The scent of brine and dried-up kelp flows like memory through my lungs, as if the sea was inside me, filling hollow spaces with its aroma. Even stretches across the sand, sunsets dripping gold into the sea, the sky blushing with warmth, the coast glowing like an ember about to sleep. The ocean wears mystery like pearls, its depths with endless dreams, its touch, both balm and blade, as calm and candle, then a shattering. It's a language without words, a song shaped in salt and rhythm, where every wave is a whispered promise, and the tide a hand that never lets me go.
Wow. Go Leonardo.
So when my newest book, A Hero's Guide to Summer Vacation, came out, I had a book launch, and I asked him, can you please be my opener and read this? And he's like, well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. What am I? No. I don't want to take your thunder. I'm like, dude, I'm a published author. You're not going to take my thunder. I'm fine. He's like, no, but I don't know, Dad. That's your event. He was actually thinking like, I don't want to do
nice.
that. I was like, no, I want you to.
Yeah.
He shows up.
What kind did you then strip to the waist, showing his perfect physique?
He did. He goes like this. He goes, all right, here we go. No, he comes in and he reads. He opens. Oh. He tells his teacher that he's going to open for me. His teacher shows up. He reads the poem, right? And it's a beautiful thing. And so what I say to this in reference to our talk is that maybe those boys that don't appear to have that sensitivity inside them, maybe there's just different spaces that we need to find to help that come out. Yeah. Maybe we need to give them the opportunity, the grace to say, hey, you know what, why don't you try this? Right? Have a teacher say, hey, by the way, he wrote a beautiful poem, right? And let him take off his shirt in front of the mirror when you're just want to watch TV, and let him talk about his day while he's flexing, and let that be the thing that they're allowed to do. That's how they express themselves. That's how we allow them their sensitivity,
Perfectly put. But I was also thinking, again, trying to pull us back to the theme about how we get these messages across. And no, your books are fantastically entertaining, funny, exciting, with also that more serious element. I wondered, do you ever worry about preaching to young people? Because I always sense that if you try and to obviously get a moral or an ethical or whatever point across, young people are resistant. In fact, all readers are resistant to being preached to. So you've got to get that kind of balance between making the book work as a piece of exciting, enthralling fiction, but also then try and smuggle in those other elements. Do you feel that you work in that same kind of way, trying to make it entertaining and also serious, or blend together?
Who here knows middle graders? Raise your hand if you know middle graders. Okay. Do you think, those of you who know middle graders, do you think that if you start moralizing to a 13-year-old, how are they going to respond to you? If me as a writer, I am writing to the 13, 14-year-old age group, 15 maybe, if I start writing with this idea that I'm going to moralize something, they're going to reject every inch of me. And I respect them for that. I get to travel all over and I get to speak, right? And mostly I speak to middle grade. We had a great panel yesterday on the middle grade space, right? And when I speak to these kids, I have some author friends that are like, they terrify me. Middle school age terrifies me. And why does it terrify you, right? Because they are so brutally honest. If they like something, you'll know. But if they don't, you'll know. and I just love that energy, that you can bring. And then boys is in particular, because that's what we're talking about. Boys in particular, I love the ones that are in the back doing this thing. Just looking like that.
There's a few of them back there as we
just
speak.
like they're just watching, or there's some kid going like this, or you see I love the group of boys that are like huddled together in the back corner, and they're like, it's like the cool. I mean, last night Tony and I are at the bar talking about what we're going to talk about, and we're like, let's slap box. Like we're literally like doing like go like this, and we're like playing that. Like there's just like a general thing, and you see them, and I love those boys. They're the best because they're like, oh, those are the ones that are being disruptive. I'm like, no, they're not. That's just how they're communicating with each other, right? That's just how they're doing. And 9 times out of 10, those boys are the ones that come up to me after a presentation. Always. 9 times out of
Brilliant.
well, not always, because that's 9 times out of 10. So 90% of the time, they come and they want to like, yo, what's up? So you played sports? You played sports? I'm like, yeah. What'd you play? I was like, I played basketball. I played soccer. I was like, oh yeah. Were you any good? I was like, yeah, I was pretty good. I'll whoop your ass. Yeah, I was. No, I did not say that to the kids, but. Yeah. But it's kind of a fun thing, and it's to be able to give that kid the space, right? That does not appear that they're listening, but they are. They're just listening in their way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I suppose one of the ways I try and bring in some of these messages is through presenting moral dilemmas in ways that really make them think.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I do is to have the main character do something terrible. So that point of view character becomes morally ambiguous. I mean, I've had an experience a bit like yours. I went to a very challenging school in London, and the kids were throwing desks around and weren't listening. And one kid did cartwheels down the front, and I said, "Okay, look, there's 20 of you here. I'll give every one of you £5 if you listen for 5 minutes. And if at the end of that 5 minutes, if you say you're bored, I'll give you £5." And suddenly that made them focus. So I then had to tell them a story that wasn't boring, or it would have cost me quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's a story that I've actually put it in a couple of books or in different forms. But when I was at school, it was a very, very rough school in the north of England. Lots of proper hardcore bullying, physical, brutal bullying all the time. And I should have been bullied because I was a bit unusual in that school, but I was, like you, good at sports, quite tall, so I wasn't bullied. But around me, there was this horror happening. And there was one kid who was, on his very first day at secondary school, his mum dropped him off at the front of the school, which was unusual because most people got the bus or walked. And his mum kissed him on the cheek in front of this, like 1,000 tough lead schoolboys and girls. And that kid left a lipstick mark on his cheek. But that was all that was necessary to separate him from the pack. And so the predators preyed on him. Every day he was kicked, punched, spat on. And me and my kind of little group of friends were just above that level. We were okay. But one day, a friend of mine invited him into our little group of friends. And I was worried that this would tilt the balance and we'd become like him, be contaminated by that death stench of failure and kick me energy. And so I resolved to drive him out of our group forever again. And I did it through a terribly hideous, sly plan. That next to my school there was a stream called the Beck, which I've written about a lot, which was this filthy, polluted, sewer-like waterway with the only thing living in it was rats and a kind of green scum. But the best thing about our school was after school we'd go jumping the Beck, because it's just the right width to be a challenging jump. And you didn't want to put your foot, it was only about up to your knees, but if you put your foot in it, you would smell like a toilet for the whole week. So a little fun thing we do after school, there's one part where the Beck swelled out to a much wider part that we called the pond. And that was it was wider and deeper and even more fetid. But somebody had dumped an old fridge in there. It's half in, half out of the water, like a sunken aircraft carrier. And one day I thought, oh, what you could do is you could jump from one side, sort of bounce off the fridge and reach the other. And that'd be a fun thing to do. It's the olden days, there wasn't much to do. But being a clever kid, I got a stick and I poked it. I saw that it kind of pivoted in this water. And that's when I got my idea. So I got Mark, he's called Mark Mathers, on one side. I said, Mark, why don't you jump the fridge bit and bounce to the far side? Everyone will think it's really cool, it'd be great. And he sort of went, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And you could see he thought this might be his way into being more popular. Yeah. And so after school, this huge crowd gathered to watch him do this thing. And for the first time ever, there was this positive energy on his behalf. Everyone was sort of cheering, yeah, it's going to be great, he's going to do this thing. And he took a big long run up like an Olympic long jump. And as he ran, the whole crowd was shouting. And he'd taken his blazer off and given it to me to hold. And I remember I looked in the pocket and there was a coin, a 50p piece. And I thought, yeah, I'll have that. So I stole that 50p piece. Anyway, he's running, sprinting. The crowd's all going, go on, Mark, go on. And he jumps. And even though I was behind him, I can still see his face shining with hope. He's leaving those years of horror and loneliness behind him, jumping into a new future where he's got friends. And then he hits this fridge ready to bounce off. But as it's designed to do it, it betrays him, it pivots and sends him face first into this filthy, foul water. And of course, the crowd then all suddenly switch and become a jeering mob. And they kick him in when he tries to get out. And they throw stones in the water to splash the filth on his face. But finally they get bored and they wander off and he picks himself out of the Beck and comes over to me in silence and takes his blazer off me in silence and walks away in silence. And the thing is that my plan worked brilliantly. He was too embarrassed to rejoin our group. And so for the rest of his time at secondary school, he was utterly and totally alone. End of story. And I was like, you're not going to cheer? I'm the hero. I won. And so that it's a kind of true story.
So is this the atonement book as well?
But it's a way of then. So obviously, when you're a reader, you think the main character will be the hero, the good guy, and so that forced them to sort of do that sudden readjustment. But no, and also to work out why was that thing that he did wrong? Was it wrong, or was it just done from fear about becoming bullied as well? So I suppose that's a kind of moral complexity that I try and bring in these issues.
The way you told that story, which is wonderful, by the way, right?
That was a short version.
So good. You see, I gave you your clap. I gave you your validation.
Thank you.
But the way that you told that story, you weren't moralizing it at all, right? So you leave the audience, or in this case, if a boy's listening to this, you leave them to decide for themselves.
To hate me. Do you all hate me now?
They can collectively hate you. They can say, that's actually a brilliant idea. I'm going to try that. And it's like there's so many things. You're leaving, you're just telling the story as is, and you're letting the listener, the reader, kind of decide for themselves. And I think that, so maybe inside you're saying, well, look, but I think more is like you're leaving open for the questions.
Exactly.
Right? You're leaving open for the possibility of the questions.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, it's one of those things that I think you can't, as a writer, I truly believe you cannot write with the intention of trying to moralize, trying to say something. There's nothing when I teach adult writers that are writing for children, the one thing I say, I go, get out of your adult head. Get out of your adult head, because there's a tendency with adult writers that are writing for young people is that they tend to want to protect them. They tend to want to, like, well, I don't want them to fail that way, or I should teach them a lesson. And then it's this thing, and the kids read right through that. Yeah. They read right through, and I think that you tell it with honesty. Some of us authenticity, whatever it is, right? That story you said, we were all like just there watching this happening, and we can decide for ourselves. And I think that the point of is, when we're having a reader, they can decide for themselves how they feel about that. And I think that's really what the task that we have for, especially for young readers.
But I mean, for me, the way to achieve those incredible things, almost accidentally, is in nearly all my books. They're first-person narratives. So the story's told from the point of view of that teenager rather than the third person. Yeah. So that as a writer forces us to be in that head and in some way use appropriate language for that group and to revisit that world.
Yeah, it's so I wrote a book called Marcus Vega Doesn't Speak Spanish, and this kid, Marcus, is an 8th grader, and he's quite big. He's a 6'1", 14-year-old kid. He weighs 215 pounds. Like, he's a big kid. And he's considers himself a bully because that's what he's been labeled as, right? And this is an important thing. When you label someone, you call them something, they start believing it themselves. And why was this important? So, he starts believing that he's the bully, right? And so, but what he ends up doing is he ends up using his size, right, as a side hustle in his school to protect younger, smaller kids from the real bully in the school. Yeah. This kid who is a wealthy, mother is the head of the PTA and all this stuff, and he kind of, he sort of, this line that I have in the book, it's almost like that Stephen doesn't, you don't see the marks that Stephen leaves. He cuts them underneath, right? And so like he's saying like, oh, making fun of kids or doing that, but then sort of like snaking away, and he's labeled Marcus as a bully. Yeah. And so the kids are kind of afraid of him, but what he does is that he starts collecting money to protect the little kids from Stephen, right? And then you don't understand, like, okay, this is a big guy, whatever, he's kind of doing this thing, he's collecting money. You don't really understand why. And then you see his brother, and his brother has Down syndrome. And he's very protective of his brother, right? And Stephen says the one word that sets Marcus off. He calls his brother the R word. And Marcus just, boom, hits him, right? Where did I get that from, right? Happened to me. My mother runs a school for individuals with special needs. The R word for me was a word that we do not ever use, ever. We don't use any of the words, but that was just something. Like when I hear someone say, oh, that's, as if to identify that population as like, that's less than, right? And it to me is a big deal. And I hit a kid in school for using that word, and I hurt him bad.
Well, I just say, so you told this story brilliantly again last night, and so I brought up the turning point question, thinking that might have been your turning point, this incident, but no, maybe you got...
No, it was the name. Well, maybe there's a lot of like start and stops, I guess. Yeah, sure. But I think the turning point to the career, I think that was the real, with the name change. But that moment in middle school, I remember it, and I instantly felt bad, and I was always the kid. So I was a very good athlete, and I was a popular kid, and but I hate to this day, I hate bullies. I hate people that like kind of prey on like weaker. I wonder if we would have been mates in school. Like, I don't know.
Who
maybe.
Knows? But it's an interesting difference between the two of us here that in a sense we both had acts of bullying, but yours was for virtuous purposes, and mine was for despicable ones. You are literally a better person than I am, Pablo.
No,
curse
but we don't.
Curse you.
I mean, it's just. I think that, but we're kind of going about it in maybe the experiences are different, right? But it's almost like what is going on inside, right? Because you've gone and reflected on that, and in your work, you're trying to put that out there to almost, like you said it, to atone, right? To feel bad. And like, you would think that this heroic act of like, stop making fun of this kid was like, no, but I felt bad doing that because I hurt somebody, right? The physical act, I physically hurt somebody, and you feel bad about that. And I think that just wrapping up with the boys, the idea of what boys are is like, like just giving the opportunity that there's a lot more going on inside. So I would love to, okay, so, you know, who was that person that you were? Like, why were you feeling that? Why did you feel the need to do that, right?
Fear.
Right, and so it's like,
and
if you had a teacher, a librarian, or maybe somebody that would said, look, you know, Tony, why did you do that? You know? Hey, look, hey, by the way, look, have you read this book? Marcus Vega doesn't speak Spanish. No, have you know, it's almost like, like giving the kid the reason, giving the boy the reason to access their feelings that maybe they don't know how to express, you know?
You brought that home beautifully, that books can help solve these problems. On that note, maybe we should put it out to the audience for questions.
Yes.
You got any?
Yes, sir.
Is there a roving mic somewhere?
Yeah, so when it comes to boys, and as you illustrated in some of the stories, by the way, very exciting conversation. I find that individually, when you ask each of the kids, particularly in the adolescent age, I think when it comes to moral compass, when it talks about all these behaviors that we expect in society out of individuals, all of that looks great, and books really help. Books kind of get all the vectors aligned perfectly. But when it comes to herd mentality, there's a completely different dimension that takes over, and boys tend to be more, it's ingrained in them to kind of conform to the herd. And there's something that actually one of the hostel wardens once told my parents when my brother was going to hostel. And the hostel warden was like, no matter what your child looks like at home with, you know, as an individual, when it comes to the herd, everything can go out of the door right away. And I feel like as a society, we do very little to address that part of it. Like whether it's stories, whether it is books, a lot of it addresses an individual. We talk about the moral compass of an individual, the way they behave, the way they act. I just love your take on the herd mentality that particularly affects boys, at least in my opinion. But
I think just to bring it back to the story that you said. I mean, because that's a literal example of a herd mentality, wasn't it? You know, it's all of a sudden they're cheering him and then they're like pushing him into the water, right? And you're telling that story, but you're not saying, don't do that, boys. That didn't come out of his mouth. He just gave the story. And so I go back to this idea of stories, right? If this group of boys reads that, right? And you're not telling them, don't do that. But they can look, and maybe a couple of them will laugh, or maybe a couple of them will like, oh, that's awesome, I would do the same thing, right? But maybe when it actually happens, you've given them a story to think about it, right? And maybe that's a step. At least that's my take on it. I mean, I just don't. I think that especially, but if I tell my son, write me a poem, he will never write me a poem. And I've seen my son and his friends, they're like wild dogs on the savannah. They're like running around, and they're like, ha, 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 and they make a mess everywhere. They come into our house, and it's like this ball, this plume of smoke that just, and they eat like everything in the fridge. They leave everything everywhere, and then they leave. What the hell just happened? You know, and you're like, oh my gosh, right? But am I going to say, well, boys, you have to learn to cook, you clean for yourself? No, you guys are, you know, I can't do that because they're not going to listen in that way, right? Yeah. So it's, you know, it's. I think that the stories are the ones that help them kind of think about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But also, I'm slightly worried that we're making too big a division between boys and girls. I mean, I think herd mentality works with girls too. You know, I've got a daughter, she went to a school where there were so many different kind of cliques, and it was so easy to offend one and be excluded. So perhaps girls are just as prone to this, but maybe in a more sophisticated kind of way because their social intelligence develops a bit earlier. I'm not sure.
I have daughters too, and I don't. My daughter was horribly bullied by other girls, and it is that sort of pack.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not here to. We're talking about boys right now,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it is true. I think it's maybe herd mentalities as a whole, and I think it's the girls certainly it's definitely another exploration of that for sure.
So, what is the noise inside girls?
Pardon?
And is the noise inside boys louder than the noise inside girls? And what is the noise inside girls?
I would never in my life presume what I know is inside a girl's mind. Never.
Yeah. Well, I've written a lot of books in my time. I've written about younger boys and girls. I've written about adult women. Most of my friends are women. I think I understand them quite well. I was a teenage boy. I know what happens inside a teenage boy's head. I never had the faintest idea what happens inside a teenage girl's head. I didn't know then. I found teenage girls terrifying as a teenager. I find them terrifying now. So that's not our story. That's out there. There are people telling that story.
Yeah, I've written 2 books in with a female.
Oh, you have? Yes, of course.
One of my books, Each Tiny Spark, it's very much modeled after my oldest child, my daughter, who has ADHD, and she's she was struggling a lot during the time that I was writing the book. It was very difficult, and the way I approached that was, how did I fail her as a father?
Is that a first-person narrative?
So it's first person, and it's almost like I wanted to get in, not inside of her head about like all the things that she's feeling, but almost like why have you been such an a-hole to me? So I'm almost like telling it to myself. What have I failed her, and why haven't I been listening to her? So it was almost like a reflection of like I just want to sit and listen. And when my daughter read the book, she said, "Bobby, that sounds just like me." I go, "So you called your father an asshole? Great, fantastic." No, there's a moment in the book that has that. It's sort of like the reflection,
Hi, thank you, Pablo, for the wonderful talk. I am a teacher, and I wanted to thank you for sharing the experience with your son.
Oh yeah.
Because in my class, I teach grade 9 and 10, and I teach literature and language to them. And I have a bunch of boys who sit at the back like this, and who make a lot of noise like this, and who just do high fives and high fist bumps. And often I keep wondering, how do I get across to these kids? And I think for me, you've sort of given me a fresh perspective on when I go back, and I will look at the boys now in a very different light and have my conversations with them and probably do a couple of fist bumps and sit with them and do the same thing. But I think it's a window, an opportunity for you to actually maybe go to schools and talk to teachers, and enlighten them on how to deal with kids like that who actually, they won't call out for attention, but I think it's nice for us as teachers to start looking at them differently.
Yeah, I mean, Nadine, you told me this wonderful story yesterday about, she's trying to like reach her boys in her school, and she decided to be the track and field coach and to like kind of connect with them. And I when she's telling me this story, I looked at her like if I was a kid in her class, I'd be like, and I said to her, I go, "Oh, that's dope. Like that's dope. Like almost like I want to try out for track and field next spring, and there's because you're just like meeting them where they are, and I think I think that doing little things like that, like it's cool, but you have to be authentic about it. You have to be real about it, right? Like if you're like, "Hey, fist bump," they're gonna be like, "Yeah, okay." Fist bump, It was So they were, they're not gonna they can see through it, I think we have another question. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, I have the mic, so I'm just talking. Hi. Thanks. It was a really very interesting chat. I teach at a university, and I take undergrad and postgrad courses. And what you said about the backbenchers, They are the warmest set of boys, but they're always making noise. They're always doing something. They're always passing some notes. There's always a joke that's doing the rounds. But they're also the boys who'll come after class, give me a, they'll come running and hand me one folded sheet of paper. Ma'am, look at it later in your cabin. And it's a hug. They've drawn a hug. Or they'll ask a question. You looked a little down today. Are you feeling okay?
Yeah.
So it doesn't stop at school. This stays on. And I think the space that we need to make for our boys and girls equally is important.
Yep.
I think as parents and educators, it's very important as society too, to understand that they both function differently. And noise always at the backbench doesn't mean is disruption.
Yeah.
They're soaking in every word that you are saying, and it comes out beautifully in ways and situations than when you least expect that.
Yeah.
So makes for a little bit of compassion. Thank you so much for your insights.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
I think our time's up, Pablo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.